Welcome to the Sustainable Living Podcast. Tips, tools, and tactics for living a heart-centered life that honors Mother Earth and her inhabitants. The information shared on the Sustainable Living Podcast reflects the opinions of host Marian West, Janice Friant, and their guests. Please use your own discretion and research before applying any information to your individual situation. Now, here are your hosts, Marian and Janice.
Hello, everyone. This is Marianne West with the Sustainable Living Podcast, and I'm here with a very special guest who is, well, as you probably know, I'm sitting in San Diego, and she is all the way on the other side of the United States, and is somebody who has made a huge impact, I think, or is going to make. I think you're already making a huge impact, but it's going to be even bigger in the world of sustainability and of agriculture. And I'm here with Tinia Pina, and I hope I said your name right because I'm bad with names.
You did a perfect job, Mariana. It's Tinia Pina. It usually takes people like 3 times, and you did it beautiful on the first time.
Well, I have to tell you, I listened to another podcast and that person said your name, and in my mind, I was saying it completely differently. So I learned. And even with practicing, I don't always get it right. And I feel very bad when I butcher people's names. So I'm glad I came close.
Oh, it's all good.
Tinia's company is called Re-Nuble, which is very clever. The way you spell it, it's www.re and then dash Nuble, and it sounds like renewable, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I love that. So part about Re-Nuble is, you guys do really interesting things to reduce waste and actually turn waste into a treasure. So would you like to tell us what you do?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And thank you for inviting me to the Sustainable Living Podcast. So Re-Nuble, basically, we upcycle organic certified produce waste into a liquid value-added product. And that is a liquid hydroponic nutrient that's intended for hydroponics. So people or businesses that grow food or plants in soilless environments. This is a product that ultimately can help them displace the use of mineral salts or chemicals in their growing systems.
Very good. So I'm really excited about that because in the past, I tried to play around with hydroponic and I couldn't find a good fertilizer. It seemed like everything was, chemical, like you say, mineral based. And so finding what you are doing, I think this is very, very exciting. Do you want to talk a little bit more about, maybe explain what hydroponics is and then how to use your product?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I think a lot more of retailers and a lot more consumers are showing in a direct interest in being able to grow, whether it's from their soil in the backyard garden or their kitchen countertops, in a system that kind of removes the seasonality of soil growth. So with hydroponics, oftentimes, Ikea and Target are starting to sell units that you're basically using water and a nutrient as the only means of growing plants, and you're subjecting the roots of these plants to the water and the nutrients so that it's a controlled system. It's a system that you can grow year round. You're not having to use pesticides or herbicides, and it oftentimes yields more crop per square foot than in a soil-based or conventional agricultural setup. So a lot of the drivers that people will either convert from a traditional conventional farm to a hydroponic farm is because it allows them to but to have a year-round production. And if not for full time, then they'll oftentimes use it as a way to complement their existing farm. So the reason why we felt we wanted to create a solution for hydroponics is because, like you said, it is very challenging to find an organic nutrient that can achieve the same efficacy. And efficacy is just measured by same leaf size, color, taste, and end yield, which would be measured by the end harvestable weight of these crops using organics. And the reason why it is challenging is because organics introduces, the microbes, the really delicate microbial reactions, and I'll try to keep it as non-technical as possible.
Thank you.
Really the really interesting things that happen in the soil. And this concept is gaining a lot more traction and getting a lot more interest because scientists want to be able to replicate what happens at the root zone, right? And that's dealing with the concept of microbiome, the really interesting things that create sometimes enhanced flavor or an enhanced nutrient profile that you can't replicate as easily or hasn't been done yet in a hydroponic system. And the reason why is because there's just so many different variables such as water, light density, temperature, the nutrients themselves that can disrupt a hydroponic system. Whereas in a soil system, the soil itself, for instance, is a lot more forgiving. Think of it as a filter or a diffuser that will take in these nutrients, break it down in a natural, slow, organic way, but it makes it more readily available for the roots of the plants to take it in a natural way. So we wanted to be able to replicate those same interactions that happen in the root zone for the plants in a hydroponic system. And just to keep it high level, hydroponic systems, there's a plethora of them, but some of the most common systems are an NFT, which is short for nutrient film technique, or you'll have a deep water pool system, which is, think of it as like a large pool with a depth of maybe 3 to 4 feet, or actually say 2 to 4 feet. And you're just having these plants on a rafting system and the roots are being completely submerged in the water. And that's where the nutrients are applied or discharged to. So that, again, throughout the entire growth cycle, it's being surrounded by the water and nutrient needs. And so growers will only put so much nutrients that the plant needs at the specific times the nutrients are needed. So to prevent myself from going on a lengthy tangent, it's really hard to do it. It has been hard to do it naturally and still be able to produce the same results as chemicals, but we've shown that it can be done with our products. And ultimately, the vision for Re-Nuble is let's see how we can truly use all of the waste of food waste. Granted, we're just using organic certified produce waste, but to serve as the entire nutrient needs of the plant so that we don't have to rely on supplements.
Wonderful. So there are several things here I need to ask you about. Let's first go to, so you were talking about growers and it sounded a little bit like mostly professional people, but really this can be applied in everybody's house, right?
Absolutely. So, I mentioned Ikea, they're selling kitchen top container systems so that people can grow herbs, basil, cilantro, parsley, for instance, or even as much as butterhead leaf lettuce or even tomatoes. And those are the most common consumer, or let's just say household type application or grow setup.
Right. Now, it could be used indoors and outdoors, right?
Correct. The great thing about hydroponics, it's providing production in a controlled environment agricultural system, which is often short for CEA. And, it can be done indoors and it can also be done outdoors so that as long as it's sheltered from, inclement weather and keeping consistent temperature, it can definitely be achieved.
So, and my other question, actually, there are a couple more which kind of come with that. So would you talk a little bit about your story, how you got involved in this? Because you really came from a very different background. You were working in the financial industry and, you weren't a farmer. Not that you're a farmer now, but you're working very closely with plants and growing food and providing healthier food for people. Do you want to tell me your story, how you got interested in this and what brought you to wanting to found this company?
Yeah. And, you're completely right. I am still not a farmer. I am always trying to have smart conversations with farmers because they teach me the most. And for our team, that's the only way we can create a better product that they can use, because we're never in the business, and I don't strive for us to be in the business of just creating product to just sell another SKU or to create profit. That's definitely not what we want to do. So yes, I went to Virginia Tech. I got a bachelor's in information technology, and then I worked with Ernst & Young, realized that, that wasn't the space for me. Great firm, great launching point, but, realized over time that I stayed within financial services, but really a lot of my most gratifying work was the work that I was doing as a team leader with New York Cares. And that was completely pro bono. New York Cares is a nonprofit that creates and aggregates community service projects around all 5 boroughs, I believe. And so I was at the time a prep SAT teacher at the Thurgood Marshall High School in Harlem, and 8:00 on Saturday mornings, that's where we would start our classes with these students. We were trying to prepare them for the SAT class or test. It was a 6 to 8 month program. And I just realized that, these kids would start with us at 8:00. I would struggle at 8:00. But the difference between me and the kids, these high school students, was, I knew what was going to keep me awake. And that was, having an apple in the morning or having something that was a little bit more nutritionally dense, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas these kids, all that was available within the 2-block radius was Dunkin' Donuts, very fatty, greasy, high processed foods. And I just felt I'm a very conscious person. I'm a very spiritual person. I just felt like, there needed, if I was going to do anything, I want to commit to, how to lessen this nutrition gap, because I would see these kids crash by noon. And then ultimately, if you look at it at a larger level, that's going to impact how productive they're going to be in retaining the information I'm teaching them, and then how that's going to dictate their future in terms of career-wise. So at the time, New York City was spending $33, a little slightly more or less, $1 million to export food waste to Virginia, Pennsylvania, and China. And I just felt that there needed to be a better system, given that if you look at the macroeconomic trends, a lot of the growth was going to be in urban cities and people were migrating there. So you're looking at food production needed to be more centralized. How can you distribute easily? And this food waste, reclaiming the nutrients from the food waste, was definitely a win-win. Though admittedly, Re-Nuble will never be that true processor that will move the needle in terms of the U.S.'s food waste volumes, but it seemed to be a solution that just benefited everyone while being able to address a problem in food production, and that being more specific to hydroponics.
Yeah, well, you might not be moving the needle, but you started to nudge it and
trying.
Yeah. Well, you're showing that something different is possible. And I truly hope you are successful and going to be a lot more successful. And by creating models like that, you probably inspire others to also think differently about food waste and what we can do with it. From what I understand, the United States are pretty high on the scale of wasting food in many different ways. I wanted to come back a little bit to the kids. So it sounds to me like you were teaching in what we call a food desert, where not that much nutritious food is available. And I think you are involved in efforts to change that, right? There are some nonprofits you're fond of. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So we're part of the New York City Ag Collective, which is a coalition, if you will, not formally, but we're of anyone in the food justice or nonprofits in the STEM education or food production space, or even for-profits that produce food, supply a component to food production, or are a service provider. And a topic that is near and dear to me, as well as to this group of organizations and individual members, is trying to, make sure that there's inclusivity and making sure that areas like food deserts can still be able to access and, more importantly, afford, the products that these foods are providing. So in urban city centers, or just cities, I should say, to keep it simple, people are more willing to pay a higher premium for food, right? And that's just, I think, more of a values aligned decision. Whereas in less urban areas, there's a higher app for price sensitivity. And so how can we, still be able to sell to those that are willing to pay a premium price, but also make it either subsidized or just affordable and accessible to those that can? And, it's just, I think it starts off first by the education and having inclusive conversations with the kids first and foremost, introducing them to these technologies, showing that there is a need for their skill sets in this industry, and then also showing that, they can also build a skill set at home, which is growing it and cooking it at home for realistic meals for their family.
So you're really going beyond just the aspect of immediate nutrition. You also want to develop a career path for people to follow, which they might never even have thought about it.
Absolutely. And that it's with Re-Nuble, we're trying to be more proactive this year. Admittedly, we haven't had the bandwidth to do it as aggressively in the past, but, starting off with colleges and making that curriculum accessible to even the college students and having the college students create workshops for nearby middle school and elementary schools, there's definitely an interest there. It's just more of like, how can we do it in a scalable way? And how can we do it in a way that's replicable so that others can take this curriculum and be able to do it at their nearby school as well? And I should name drop, New York Sunworks does a phenomenal job right now doing this already in schools. They have a number of projects they implement and maintain and provide consistent education. We see it as, it's an ecosystem interest of ours, and we may not be always the curriculum developer, but we are certainly committed to supporting it.
Excellent. Now, I have a question for you. You might not know the answer to. It's kind of, or I guess, a little bit of a political question. So here in California, and this might be also different from school district to school district. I'm not sure. But I live in a small town close to San Diego. And we have the honor not said over 50% of our kids are obese, and said 1 out of 5 kids lives in food insecurity. And there has been an effort to put school gardens in at schools and to also do gardens in preschools. But the regulations are as such that the kids cannot eat out of the gardens. So the food cannot be used in the meals, which is crazy to me. Now, is it different in your area? Do you know?
Yeah, I've never, that's really unfortunate. I've never heard of such,
yeah, but it's crazy, right?
Yeah, why would that be?
I don't know. There's this idea that they could get sick from the organic food. And to me, it's like, really, you prefer stuff which is sprayed with all kinds of pesticides? You know? Yeah. So, and sugar, as you mentioned, the kids with donuts, I mean, there is enough studies now to show that sugar creates this rush of energy, and then it's a complete drop, right? If you have whole food, you have a much different prolonged energy level for learning or doing things. Yeah. So I'm glad to hear it's not that crazy where you're at, because, I totally could see, and we haven't talked about yet, but do you want to address vertical growing and then how that could really help in inner city areas and stuff like that?
Yeah, sure. So vertical farming, I think, is definitely maybe unlike in other areas. So I know it's gotten some traction in Detroit. It's definitely has a footprint here in the tri-state area of New York with Aero Farms. And there's more interest being committed to that space, I think, because of how can we reuse these warehouse spaces where manufacturing may not be as attractive or haven't, finding manufacturers to operate in that space isn't as abundant as perhaps projected. But what is food production, right? And so I think for addressing high density food production that's local, yes, that's a great solution. I think what we still need to see, and us included, is, the economics to make sure that that's sustainable. With real estate, for instance, so incredibly expensive in New York City and DC, I think a lot of perhaps what's overlooked is how truly local, and I shouldn't say local, but how close is it going to be really within these cities, or is it going to need to be, possibly 50 to 100 miles outside the city, or within 200 to still say it's local? So, to answer your question more succinctly, there's definitely an opportunity. There's more investors getting into this space, which is great because they see it as like an asset investment. However, I think, there's still more that needs to come to prove the operational sustainability of it, and to prove to investors that you can still be able to sell and make a return given the high costs on the real estate.
Now, there were also rooftop farms mentioned. Do you think that's more of like a gimmick or some which is kind of cool and can be done a little bit? Or is it actually something which might be an option for cities to pursue more?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Viraj Patel at Gotham Greens, he's the founder of Gotham Greens, or co-founder, I should say, definitely proved that model can work. They do it in Chicago. They have several farms in New York City, and that's for the rooftop completely enclosed greenhouse structure. And then you even have rooftop soil-based groups such as Brooklyn Grange that shows that they're just as viable as well. You have Edenworks, which is not rooftop, but they're looking to scale up their completely indoor aquaponics farm. And that's a slightly different iteration of hydroponics where it's using fish as the ultimate fish waste, I should say, as the ultimate nutrient provider. So yes, there are examples proving that it's done. I think to show that more entrants can get into the market and be just as successful, that's what still needs to be kind of tested.
So you said about 200 miles from the city, and I read in your blogs that your company is trying to source all your supplies into that area to kind of stay local. So I thought that was very cool.
Thank you. Yeah, we were fortunate to have, and it's an article that I'm trying to get us to push out. We were fortunate to have a student team of Columbia University environment engineers to look at our life cycle analysis. And that was definitely a recommendation, trying to keep as much of the locally sourced waste streams as possible. So it's one that we want to scale with. We're still not entirely there yet, but it's definitely a vision of ours.
Cool. Just to sew this in so I don't forget, because sometimes I get excited about talking and then I forget. So we already talked about how to reach you through your website, and you're also on Twitter, and that's RE_NUBLE. And then on Google Plus, you're everywhere, which is great, which is plus and capital RE-Nuble. Say Nuble for Nuble. Facebook, it's facebook.com Re-Nuble. And then we have you on Instagram under Re_Nuble, and on Pinterest. Now, Pinterest, it's UK Pinterest. Were you in England at one point?
That's interesting. No, it should be US based, but I will definitely look into that.
Yeah, look into that. So I was like, really? That's interesting. So let's get back to sourcing. You were mentioning already that you source from organic waste only. Can you kind of explain the organic thing? And then does it mean your product is organic? Or, also I think we might want to talk about a difference between certified organic and what a lot of people look at as organic.
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason why we source organic certified produce waste is so that we can keep to our process really only using and being compliant to chemical-free only processes and no inputs of chemicals being in the product itself. So that means we have to be committed and be super diligent about separating any organic certified produce waste that we kellect, and that is coming from an organic certified produce stream. And then any additives, so we do use fish hydrolysate, we use sea kelp, those are also OMRI certified. And so the OMRI certification allows our product to be third-party verified that we're only using OMRI certified ingredients and that they reviewed our process as truly only incorporating organic inputs. We haven't achieved that yet. We're undergoing the review process, but it provides credibility and, third-party verification that we're not just making these claims, and it allows our farms that have USDA certification to be able to grow organically using our product.
Very good. Speaking of your product, we haven't really introduced exactly what you have. Would you talk about what you're selling to the public?
Oh, great point. I was going to ask you for your story, Maria. So we basically create liquid hydroponic nutrients. Think of it as a organic or biologically derived substitute or alternative to a Miracle-Gro, if you will. And the main features that growers, whether they're hobbyists at home or even your commercial growers that sell to supermarkets or farmers markets, for instance, they want to make sure that the product is water soluble, meaning that once it's subjected to water in a hydroponic system, the nutrients are going to be available for the plant to actually receive and use it. They want to make sure that's completely homogeneous. So, when you put it in the bottles, they're going to completely separate and completely change the composition of the product. And And then also making sure that, are we, truly using the 30 to 35% of reclaimed nutrients from the organic certified waste. So we have 3 products. We have our Away We Grow, which is namely used for leafy lettuce products, and some herbs even like basil, cilantro, etc. We also have True Bloom, which is namely for your fruiting crops. So think of tomatoes, peppers, things of that that require a 2-part formula. And when I say that, I mean it requires the Away We Grow and a True Bloom. The reason for that is it's very hard to have an all-in-one formula for a fruiting crop because they need a different concentration of nutrients at specific times. And then we have a booster shot, which is our supplementary formula. It's phenomenal with microgreens in that the feedback has been a really great color. The taste is very distinct, and some people use it on the same lettuce or the same tomatoes, for instance, for those same features.
Now, if you don't have a system yet and you're excited about your product, can you use it in soil-based growing too, or would that be not a good application?
You absolutely can. The feeding schedule is very different for soil, and feeding schedule meaning how much you apply the nutrients for the specific type of crop is going to be different than for a hydroponic system. And that's simply because soil is more forgiving, so you don't have to use the same amount and concentration of the nutrients. But yes, it definitely can.
So some people like to do things like compost tea and spray it on the leaves. So is that something you could do with your fertilizer as well?
That's a great point. So as a compost tea, it's an alternative to that because there's shelf life to it, right? Mm-hmm. So we have not advised using it as a foliar spray, so spraying it on the leaves, because of the fact that there's fish hydrolysate and the produce waste. So just to be super sure, and we don't want to advise using it and then growers, whether commercial or consumer, are not washing their plants well enough and there be a food safety issue. Though the nutrients can be taken in through the leaves, but because there's a waste component to it, or scraps, I should say, food scraps, we wouldn't advise using it as a foliar spray.
Very good. That's good to know. And on your website, you have a feeding schedule, right? So if somebody wants to use your product and they go, oh, how do I do it? They can come on and you say, okay, first week, this much, right?
Exactly.
Excellent. That helps a lot. You were telling me in an earlier communication about biomimicry. Would you talk about this a little bit? Because I think that's like a buzzword people hear a lot about, but maybe not necessarily know how to relate that to a product, or what does it mean in my gardening career, so to speak.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So, as I mentioned, I did by trade, biology, agronomy, soil science is not what I went to school for at all. I have no technical training. A lot of it has been self-taught or surrounding myself with really smart people, and continue to do that. Biomimicry, even as someone in school, though, I was really fascinated by, because you can take concepts from nature, whether it's an ecosystem or certain biospheres or microbiomes, right? Really targeted areas within a natural ecosystem, and look at how the interactions, whether it's between 2 different organisms, 2 different species, or just between 2 different types of, let's say, energies, right? And looking at how there's an exchange of resources. So the inputs and outputs of a system, for instance. And you can take those same concepts and those same learnings of what works well if there's like an overconsumption, how that outbalances or outweighs, the outputs on the other end, and use those same theories to apply to business models. And for us, we try to apply it to product development. So, for instance, the vision of really being able to use nothing but produce waste to serve as the nutrients of plants. That's being able to take biomimicry and looking at what are some of if a plant receives too much of an input in a natural environment, what are some of the downstream reactions to the overall ecosystem that we should be mindful of, because that's those same type of interactions, those same type of negative externalities, or let's just say errors or bad effects, may also be important for us to know. So yeah, biomimicry is something I've always been fascinated by. I'm still trying to learn as much as possible because I definitely think it'll be instrumental to our product development.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way about many different products, that we really can watch nature and learn and then translate it into what we want to do.
Exactly.
So I want to buy your product. What do I do?
Oh, good question. I appreciate you asking. So you would go to our website at www.re-nuble.com. It's, very, I would say simple in terms of go to the product page. And then from the product page, you pick the unit size. So we sell at a smallest unit at pint. And then the largest is 2.5 gallons, typically for your commercial grower. And then from there, you will receive a confirmation of the product order if you choose to buy one, and delivery details. So, that's the easiest way. We're always trying to get feedback. If you have any questions, emailing us. I'm very responsive and try to field that as well.
Mm-hmm. So right now, it's direct sales only. You're not in stores. Like you wouldn't go down to the hydroponic store and buy your products there. Do I understand that right?
Great point. So that is something that we're being more aggressive on now. So we are trying to get in stores in New York through, I would say the Mid-Atlantic region. That's where our presence is. Mm-hmm. And then as, we get into other stores because we're waiting for permits in the state. So with a fertilizer, you have to have a permit or a license to sell that fertilizer in each state that you distribute to. And there's certain states we don't have it for yet. So until then, that unfortunately direct sales is the only way for the states that we are permitted.
Direct sales wouldn't affect it, or can people from all over the United States order your product?
So they can pre-order. It depends on where they're at. They can pre-order, for instance. Mm-hmm. Great example is California. We're not permitted to sell in California, so they can pre-order. And then we would definitely be in close communication when we're actually able to fulfill that pre-order because the permitting has been approved.
Okay, that's so interesting that it's from state to state, Mm-hmm. You would think never mind. I'm sure it's you have like enough headache with to deal with all the different regulations and, which is some I think a lot of us don't even think about when you start a business. There are so many different aspects to consider. Do you find that your background in the business world helped you with that part of creating this new business, or was it brand new for you to have to learn all those in and outs?
Oh, yeah. I think having a business background made me aware of what I would need to know and need to I can't say I've even mastered things yet, but be more experienced with, right? Mm-hmm. But it's always a process that you're not until you're maybe a serial entrepreneur. And I would even think as a serial entrepreneur, there's still things that they haven't mastered yet, but it's always trial and error and just learning things as you grow and as you're developing new markets even. So just when I started off, I got a mentor oftentimes through either the school that I was getting some training from, which was Columbia University's Earth Institute, or even score.org, which gives you access to a national base of mentors that will tell you things that, you can avoid as challenges, right? But even till this day, Marianne, I think I'm still figuring things out.
Yeah, that's probably for all of us that we are lifelong learners, right? There's always something else we don't know about.
Exactly.
I wanted you to go a little bit more into how you started out, because I feel there are a lot of people in the world right now which don't want to work for somebody anymore, but they want to create their own business and so forth. And I believe you actually started your company by working another job. Do you want to go a little bit about the beginning? We already talked about you saw the kids kind of suffering from their sugar diet, and you saw food being wasted at the same time, and the disconnect of people not having access to the healthy food and wanted to do something about it. But can you just go a little bit deeper into that process, how you didn't come from a billionaire background, right? So you just could put down a couple of millions and hire everybody you wanted. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Yeah, I worked full time for the first 3 years because we were taking a very abstract concept and tweaking as we go, trying to figure out if we were going to, who we were competing against and how could we really create this product that's not going to completely disrupt a hydroponic system and create a mold bloom and all those things. So for the first 3 years, I worked full time and I did Re-Nuble around the clock. While also doing that, we were really privileged and thankful to receive some grant funding that just really was dedicated to R&D. I was fortunate to have some people early on the team that transitioned to advisors to help us with, the R&D, the product development. And I went through savings, and any discretionary income that I had that would have went to savings went into the company as well. So I was very tight on money, and not to say that there's like a large savings now, but very tight on money the first 3 years because everything went to the business. And then in 2015, because we had a product and it was more about trying to get market fit, we were aggressively trying to raise a little bit of pre-seed. And what I mean by pre-seed is pre-product money from an accelerator. And an accelerator is an incubated program that you have a dedicated team that also puts a small amount of cash investment in your company or concept at that point for you to really just create something, test it, create your minimal viable product is often what is termed as, and run with it, right? Mm-hmm. And, a couple of resources I would definitely like to name drop. One is GUST.com. Another one is F as in Frank, the number 6, S as in Sam.com. And just doing a ton of grant research and accelerator research to get us that early funding, because I did not and still do not come from a background of here's $50,000 of play money, try to make this your next career. Mm-hmm. So I was bootstrapping it. We still are bootstrapping it. And so that was the way for me to go into it cautiously, for me to test, what was going to work, when we needed to create like a deadline of if this doesn't work, I'm going to go back to the full-time career. And we walked ahead. Well, I'm not saying this right, but we made 2 steps progress and took a step back sometimes, inching forward, inching back for 3 years. And so most of our growth has been in the past year and a half since we started going to market last fall and really getting a lot of the product in what I would say is some thought influencers' hands so that they can play with it, give us feedback, see if we need to adjust things like pricing and so forth to make it more competitive.
Excellent. You did some name dropping and you kind of flipped out a little bit. So would you repeat Sir Frank's name?
Sure. So one website is f6s.com, and that's F as in Frank, 6 as in the number 6, and then S as in Sam.com. And all that is a platform that has a number of accelerators that fund different startups and the times that they do.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Where do you see yourself going with your company?
Yeah, the vision still is to be able to truly use food waste as a technology for a number of different markets within food production. And so, right now we can say our product works really well with your individual consumers and your small to medium sized scale grower. But the industrial scale is something that is our next kind of aspiration to really serve their needs. So the larger scale commercial farms like Bright Farms or Gotham Greens, for instance, is definitely on our roadmap in terms of product development, and then being able to kind of distribute our manufacturing model in a way so that there's been a lot of interest in countries such as Pakistan, Tanzania, other areas within Africa, for instance, where abundance of food waste, scarcity of water, and they want to be able to merge those two resources or assets, if you will, and create an opportunity. So, how can we leverage our working model here so that it's just as successful and possibly in a more cash constrained area or market internationally where, they can also use the same technology.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Did you have another subject you wanted to bring up we haven't touched on?
No, I try, not for myself or Re-Nuble. I think maybe more for you, Mariana, is, with the Sustainable Living podcast, where do you see the most interest for food production being? And is it anything that's more unconventional that you've heard of and people kind of like getting into that are maybe is more eccentric than normal?
Well, it depends on your definition of normal.
Good point.
That's kind of like, a difficult one to establish. Myself, I come from a background of permaculture, so going that way, and I think what you're doing is super in tune with that, to use everything as a resource, because again, talking about biomimicry, that's what nature does. Nature doesn't waste anything. It becomes, whatever drops becomes food for the new plant. And I also think that more and more people becoming aware of the health and food connection, that we really can't afford to eat what's in the middle of the supermarket, basically. And even the produce aisles are often loaded with heavily sprayed or GMO products and so forth. So I believe that most of our listeners are really on a quest of making a change in their life and wanting to find the different steps to do that. And I think that's why I'm so excited about your product, because, well, two different reasons. I have mentioned that on the show before, but a while back we did the Gerson therapy, which is a very heavily produce, basically each person eats about 20 pounds of produce a day, which a lot of it is in the form of juice, and there are a lot of greens involved. And there were people in, Hawaii, in Sweden, in Finland, who in the wintertime couldn't even get a hold of a head of romaine, let's say. And if they could, it was so expensive that to choose like 5 heads a day became pretty much impossible to do. And I see hydroponic as an indoor growing as a huge step to enable people all over the world to live a much healthier life. Your product is kind of the answer, because as I said before, I was playing with it, but I didn't have great results with, the kelp, or it's mostly kelp what you can get. And then it says on the package, do not use, in hydroponics. So I was like, yes, organic, which I understand you can't call yourself organic certified yet, right? But organically sourced. And that's, to me, it's important. I don't care about the stamp organic certified. I care about what's in a product. Does that answer your question?
No, totally. And one thing I've always been interested in is, how do you take regenerative permaculture, right? And have you seen any working models of that in cities?
There are a lot of people which believes that actually the future of permaculture is in the cities. And I don't know how much you're familiar with the movement, but one of a super nice leader in the field, he wrote Gaia's Garden. Toby Hemingway just passed away. Wow. And the book Gaia's Garden really focuses on urban permaculture. And he talked about that they had moved in the country and realized that now they had to try a lot more to get to their jobs they still had to maintain, and to see friends and so forth. Said even in a crisis situation, they would be more isolated, and ended up moving back into the city and said, okay, let's use our third acre or quarter acre and implement as much growing techniques as we can. Again, the vertical farming, all of that, where you now provide a tool or a help with your product with to be able to make it viable and make it organic, would play such a big deal in that. So,
interesting.
Yeah. It wouldn't be all about hydroponics, obviously, but in a city's idea too is that you build community, and that maybe you grow oranges and your neighbor grows lemons, and then you exchange that, or that one grows tomatoes and so they're peppers if you have only small pieces, that you don't have to do it all. So, that's kind of, I think, how it's more applied in the city. And then also using maybe public spaces to go in, creating public food forests and stuff like that.
Got it. No, that's interesting. But at least like the way you describe it, it sounds realistic,
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's totally doable. And a big part of it is to enter into the spirits of corporation. And again, when you asked about our listenership in the podcast, I think a lot of people who are part of our family, if you want to say that, are seeking for other models of conducting life, to step away from everybody has to do everything themselves and to say, okay, I'm strong in this and you're strong in this other aspect, and how can we cooperate and do it together?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. So you turn some tables on me here, lady. Good move. Good move. So, anything else you would like to tell me?
No, if there's something, any questions we can be of help with, if there's any topics, I'm happy to serve as a resource both to you and your listeners. And we love new conversations. I had a conversation with a gentleman that, yes, he was trying to figure out his next career move, but it was more out of sheer curiosity of how food waste operating models are working. And I'm happy to kind of share my experience, especially because I don't believe, it's one of competition, especially in the food waste. It's so hard to just pull off. It's definitely going to have to come from collaboration. So however I can help, as long as within my bandwidth, I'm happy to do so.
Very cool. Thank you so much for being part of the podcast. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
It was such a pleasure to meet Tinia and to find out what she's doing with her company. And I truly hope that soon I can buy her product here in California. I also wanted to tell you about what I did this weekend. First of all, I need to apologize that I'm late posting this podcast. Last week has been quite busy, let's put it this way. Lots of people stuff going on. And part of my own application of sustainable living is to take care of people first. And yes, you, our listeners who we love and adore, are people, but the ones in flesh and blood in front of me are getting the first attention. So I hope you forgive us for being late. One thing I was busy with was organizing, or co-organizing rather, the workshop with Diana Leaf Christian. So we did learn a lot about sociocracy and healthy community living. And I hope you get a chance to listen to a podcast. And also, if you are interested in creating a better way of functioning in people-run organization. And actually, I even think this is some which could be totally applicable to families when the kids are not really small anymore. I really encourage you to listen to our interview and to also check her out and see if she's in your area. And if you're from the San Diego area, we might have another event with her later in the fall. But the main fantastic cool thing which happened at the workshop is that I met one of our listeners in person. Dawn, thank you so much for listening. It's such a great feeling to meet one of you in person and talk to, and to actually really see, yes, there are real people out there. I mean, we know people listen to us because we get to look at figures. There's like statistics on how many people are downloading our podcast. But to actually see you and be able to hug you is just really cool. So thank you, Dawn, for coming up and telling me, said you listened to the podcast and came to the event. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So this is about connecting, and we really want to hear from you. Email us. We have our Gmail address. It's sustainablelivingpodcast@gmail.com. Then we have the web addresses. So it's either Janice at sustainablelivingpodcast.com or Marianne at sustainablelivingpodcast. I should know by now how to say that.com. And you can reach us just about via any social media. Well, not all of them, but most of them you can reach us. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, what's the other one? Pinterest, Twitter. Tweet us. Please be in touch. We love to hear from you. We love to hear your feedback. We want to know what you want to hear, what you like, what you don't like. Yes, we do want to hear what you don't like too, so we can get better. That's what we want to do, get better. Have a wonderful week. Have a wonderful year, and talk to you soon.